Hey guys, welcome back to Philip Draws Comics. I'm Philip. This is my face you see on screen right now talking at you. And today we're going to do something a little different. Today I'm going to try to teach you something. Specifically, I'm going to try to teach you how to draw hands. And more specifically, I'm going to try to teach you how to draw hands like famous manga artist Akira Toriyama. Now, if you're anything like me, drawing hands can be one of the single biggest frustrations when it comes to learning how to draw. The hand is very complex, has a lot of moving parts, and getting them all looking right and looking right in relation to each other can be very stressful. On YouTube, there's tons of videos that explain in more intricate detail how to construct hands properly. But don't worry, if you haven't seen any of those, you should be able to follow this video, no problem. Now, Toriyama is very good at drawing hands. And I think the reason for that lies at the heart of why Toriyama's art is so enjoyable to look at. It's because he draws things in a very three-dimensional space, as opposed to someone like Bruce Timm, who draws realistic three-dimensional images flattened down into a 2D plane. Toriyama takes things that are inherently two-dimensional and can draw them and orient them properly in three-dimensional space. So today I'm going to use that principle to show you how to draw Toriyama hands from very detailed down to very simple. And right now that means starting out with something you probably weren't expecting, and that's how to draw dragon hands. As you can see, the fingers that Toriyama draws for dragons and monsters, specifically like the Eternal Dragon, have a different knuckle structure than a normal hand. But the reason I want to start with that is because I want to show off how he bends that shape and all those different shapes that form a finger, how he bends them in three-dimensional space and uses shading and texture to trick your eye into thinking you're looking at a three-dimensional image. And then we're going to take what we learned in these more extreme examples and apply them to regular human hands, like the kinds you would see on Goku or Vegeta or Gohan. Now, Toriyama is a very deliberate artist. He doesn't always draw a lot of detail, but the detail he does draw is very specifically chosen by him. As you watch this particular hand, watch how the fingers curve around each other. They don't interact with each other. They don't get confused in space with each other. And it ends up with a very almost like fractal image. Like this looks like a clockwork gear or a buzzsaw. Every piece of the finger exists in its own space away from each other. And then each aspect of the finger exists in its own space in relation to the other parts of the finger. That helps you when you're drawing to think of the thing three-dimensionally instead of letting all the sort of different parts run together. Then if you manage to take shading and apply it to the same principles, highlighting areas that are facing a consistent light source and darkening the areas that are facing away from the light source, again, like I say, you can trick your eye into thinking you're looking at a three-dimensional image. Now, the last drawing was of a more sort of 1999 era dragon. This is going to be more of a more 1985 style dragon. It's going to be very simple. But again, notice how Toriyama doesn't have the claws pointing towards the center of the hand. They're all pointing off center and away from each other in a very distinct way. Like I say, this looks almost like a fractal or like a mathematical proportioned out image. I think that's what adds so much to Toriyama's style, is that it's very almost mathematical and modular in a way. So now we're going to take that idea of each piece of the finger and the hand being its own thing and existing in its own separate space and apply it towards regular human style hands. Now here I'm going to illustrate the fact that the meat of the hand bends forward across the back of the hand. So when you're drawing a hand in a cupped, sort of like a Kamehameha position, the bits around the finger and the bits around the thumb squish and cover up the rest of the palm. And for me, the real tricky part of drawing a hand is not only having each finger exist separately and look right on its own, it has to interact with other fingers that are probably covering it up in some way, shape, or form. And so the best way to kind of get around that is to just bite the bullet and draw every part of each finger even the aspects of that you're not going to see from the angle you're looking at the hand from. So basically, it's what you call drawing through an image. As I go along, that thumb doesn't look quite right. It didn't look like the hand was doing a grasping motion like I wanted it to. Eventually, I realized that it was too far over. The proportions of the thumb was right, but it just wasn't positioned properly. And that's where drawing in pencil can really help you over drawing in pen. Is when I go through it in pen now, you can see I'm basically drawing the image for real. I try not to do a whole lot of actual drawing in the pencil stage, because I know as I'm kind of just mapping out where I want the pen lines to go. And the good thing about that is that I'm now able to, because all the construction lines are drawn properly in there, I'm now able to draw over them with pen, and when I erase it, all those construction lines will be gone, and the fingers will be pointing in the more or less right direction. But the thing that Toriyama really focuses on when he draws hands is the fingernails. And I can see why, because it's very helpful. The way those fingernails bend towards, or kind of become like crescent moons, help position the hands. And they help you, the artist, orient those fingers in space and telegraph how they're supposed to be going. Doing so allows you to create a flat surface at the end of each finger that gives it like I say, that three-dimensional vibe. Then going back with the pencil, I'm now marking out the shade lines. And the important thing about using shade with Toriyama hands is that now that you can think of each knuckle and piece of the finger separately, as you're putting the shade on there, you'll do the same thing. You'll think of the shadow interacting with each part of the finger separately. So you don't just have, a blanket shade over one finger. You have the shade shifting as it moves up the finger around the hand, creating a three-dimensional image. Again, it's all about tricking your eye into thinking it's looking at something in 3 dimensions. I'm only using 2 tones here to color the hand, and we'll explain why later. I'll do 3 tones on the hand after next, and we can kind of look at the difference. But the more tones you have on a thing, the shinier it looks, basically. And so if you're going for like leather or sweaty skin, more tones are better, but otherwise I'd keep it simple. Now, right now, speaking of keeping it simple, this is kind of the simplest way to draw a hand. As you note, the way the knuckles go up and down around, that's the thing you want to always have on a closed fist. You want to have the knuckles sort of going around, not flat across. Now, the reason we're doing this particular drawing is because this is the easiest way to draw Toriyama hands. If you're trying to pose somebody looking cool, just a closed fist and having it hang down at the sides like that gives it it looks good, but it's not a whole lot that you have to draw. But no matter when you do that or how you execute this, you have to remember that it's existing in 3-dimensional space. So the same way that the knuckles wrap around, the arm cuff, for example, and the wrist is going to wrap around the arm in 3 dimensions. So you're going to need to think about it kind of like a box. We're going to go ahead and draw, most of the fighters in Dragon Ball Z have wrist cuffs, and it's good to kind of think of it's a good way to think of clothes as something that, again, exists in its own space and interacts with the things around it. So again, now we're going to use shade, line weight, and texture to kind of trick our eyes into seeing something in 3 dimensions. And I drew a little sun there to give you an idea of where the consistent light source is going to be coming from. So the arm cuff is going to be hiding in shadow away from the sun, and the bits that's facing towards the sun are going to be, generally, I'd say go with a lighter tone, or if you want to go really extreme, have it be white. Again, like if you're doing sweaty skin, or if you want that cuff to kind of read as more leather in texture than cloth, do high contrast white as the lightest aspect of the shade. But again, you want the shade to wrap around the 3-dimensional aspects of the hand and arm to help you see it in a way that telegraphs it has more detail than it actually does. So now we're going to do a closed fist from the other direction, and we're going to try our best to position the thumb properly. I always recommend when you're drawing, if you feel like putting detail in earlier in the planning stages, go ahead, because for me, it helps me orient myself if I go ahead and start putting in some detail. Now, one thing you can do with Toriyama style that might not be able to do with other styles is see that thumb, the way it's positioned, there's no connective tissue around it. It's literally you just drop and place that that part of the thumb on the fist and hide the connective tissue behind it. Now, if you're drawing like a guy who's drawn a full body image and you're not putting a whole lot of detail into the hands, the less detail you're putting into the hands, the more you can get away with. But if your image is very hand focused, if it's a hand coming at you in martial arts style or fist style, then you probably don't want to cut corners like that if it's going to be the focal point of your image. Now you'll note the nail on that thumb is a lot flatter than on the hand sitting next to it. It doesn't have that extreme crescent moon angle. There again, that's a real simple trick you can employ to help orient the fingers in space. The more extreme the angle, the more foreshortened everything's going to be, particularly the nails on the fingers. One thing I always appreciated about Toriyama's style, having grown up reading superhero comics where costumes laying on bodies, basically a superhero is just a naked body with a costume spray painted on it. No three-dimensional lines separating like Superman or Spider-Man's pants from their boots. It's all just one smooth image. But Toriyama, when he draws clothing on characters, boots, gloves, wrist cuffs, he always makes sure to have them exist, again, in their own three-dimensional space. The wrist cuff wraps around the arm and is thicker than it. Now, in contrast to the hand sitting beside it, which is only 2 tones, this hand is going to be 3, because the original is from a picture of Goku where he's going Super Saiyan, so he's got that extra light source of his own aura. And basically, I would say, treat each piece of the hand as a separate entity and think about where all 3 levels of color are going to go. And make sure to keep it consistent, have all the whites on one side, all the darker colors on the other, and all the mediums in the middle. Now this next hand is going to be Piccolo's, and we're going to use different things that we learned in the last couple of hands. Piccolo's hands, at least the way they're drawn by Toriyama, are different than a regular human's hands. First of all, he's only got 3 fingers and a thumb. In the anime, they made a point of giving Piccolo and the other Namekians, 5 digits on their hands. But Toriyama draws them slimmer and more tapered. In the example of the human hands, they come sort of like a box shape. But with these kinds of hands, which we can call alien hands, because Frieza has hands similar to this, and so does Cell, you see the thin black fingernail versus the square fingernail on a human hand. And then what's more, you see Piccolo doesn't have a wrist cuff like most of the other fighters, but he does have this red bit of skin that wraps around his wrist. Now, the reason I point all this out is because there's actually a lot of variety in the different ways Toriyama draws hands, and each way he draws hands expresses something specific about the character. Now, right now I'm going to give you little shorthand on how to draw male hands versus female hands. A lot of the things that we learn drawing male hands apply to the female hands. The biggest difference between them is that the male fingers are very thick at the end, very meaty and beefy, and the female fingers taper up to points. Much more, sort of a simple rule for drawing female Toriyama hands is less is more. Less extremes, less exaggeration, something maybe a little more closer to how you would draw just like a regular female hand. But now for this next section, we're going to kind of speed run through a bunch of different Toriyama hands, sort of through the ages. This right now is a Goku hand from like chapter 3 of the manga. And if you know anything about rubber hose type characters, this hand might look kind of familiar to you. It's very much in the style of Mickey Mouse or somebody like that. After that, we have a Bulma hand, and you can see contrast the fatness of Goku's hand with the slenderness of Bulma's, specifically the nails. Goku's nail is squatter and wider, whereas the nails on Bulma's fingers are tapered, and it's kind of like it's a rectangle versus a triangle. That there's a Oolong hand when he's in a human form. This here is Yamcha hand in a martial arts pose. You'll note how the orientation of the nail slides up until the pinky nail is pretty much upside down. And this is Master Roshi holding a broom, and you can see how few lines you need to characterize that. I think that's a testament to the fact that Toriyama was able to get 15 pages of manga written and drawn every week. And so sometimes you just have to draw things in a very, you have to telegraph it in a very simple way, as few lines as possible to telegraph that someone is holding a broom. It's just something you can gloss over and move on to the next panel. This is from a few years later. It's a Gohan hand from the Saiyan saga. And again, you can kind of see the similarities to Goku's hand with the the rectangular fingernails, but there's more detail in it. It's a lot less rubber hose, Mickey Mouse style hand. This here, we're going for broke with a much more complex hand. This is Nappa during the Saiyan saga, getting ready to throw the attack that kills Piccolo. And this hand is right at the forefront as he's rearing back his other one to charge an attack. And so Toriyama put a crap ton of detail into this hand, but you can still see that it's essentially a cartoony hand with all the cartoony things we've learned about hands in this video, but it's rendered in such a way that it gives it a lot of weight and shape and depth to it. Again, this was the focal point of the image. This was the first thing you saw with Nappa's body behind this hand, and so this hand got a lot of attention from Toriyama, and you can see by how much detail we put into it that honestly you can see how, if you're not Akira Toriyama, if you're an amateur like me, how easy it is to sort of lose the shape and definition of that hand. You can tell when you look at Toriyama's hand, it was a lot cleaner than mine. And then last but not least, we got a couple of Vegeta hands from towards the end of the entire series during the Majin Buu arc. And again, just showing you how quickly you can draw something, how few lines you need to telegraph that something exists. Well, guys, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this was the first time I ever tried teaching anyone anything, doing one of these teaching videos. So give me some feedback in the comments. Let me know how I did, if I kind of glossed over anything you were interested in, or if there's just some aspect of drawing hands in Akira Toriyama style that I didn't touch on that you wanted to know more about. By the same token, if you want to know anything else about drawing in Akira Toriyama style, if you want to see me make a video on drawing eyes or clothes or hair or anything like that, I'd be more than willing to. Hopefully, if you came to this video wanting to learn more about how to draw the hands of Akira Toriyama, hopefully you learned something you didn't know before. If you've made it this far and you don't have much interest in learning how to draw hands like Akira Toriyama, I hope you at least learned something you can take into your own drawing style and incorporate into the way you draw. I've drawn a lot of videos for this channel, and I find that the ones that I do in the style of Akira Toriyama are just more enjoyable for me overall. It's a style that I didn't have to force myself to learn when I was younger. I was so obsessed with Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Quest and all the works of Akira Toriyama that I just sort of inhaled and learned all these things just through osmosis, which is probably the best way to learn things. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what kind of videos you want to see me drawing in the future. Have a great day, guys. Thanks for everything. Bye.